Go Hawks. Now, go to the book of Habakkuk right now, all right? We're getting busy just out of the chute, man. We're going to do this thing, all right? So go ahead, go to the book of Habakkuk. You don't know where it's at, look in the front of your Bible, and it will take you there because you're going to probably need that. So I am going to pray, and then we are going to get underway. Jesus, I thank you so much for this particular little book. I thank you for what it has taught me and reminded me of. You know, it's so easy to look at just today, you know, and to look at the problems of today, to look at the worries of today, to look at the current cultural environment around us in any given age or time, and therefore to even lose hope or have a sense of despair or to be more negative than ever positive. And I see that in Habakkuk. And then I see what you reassure. I see the confidence that you give in the context of his situation. And so I pray that you will speak your solutions into us, that you will speak your perspective into us, that we will realize that your providence is greater than our perspective. And if anything, our perspective needs to be shaped through the lens of your providence. So we look to you today to teach us that and to work things out in us. And so we love you, we look to you, and we thank you in your good name. Amen. All right, so hopefully you are on your way to this thin little teeny book called the book of Habakkuk. Real quick, if you weren't with us last week, we looked at chapter 1. I'm going to give you just a super brief recap. So Habakkuk is a prophet. He is in the last two remaining tribes of the Israelites in their homeland at this particular time in history. The other 10 tribes that were in the north called Israel, they've all been wiped out by the Assyrians, taken into captivity 100 years earlier. Habakkuk is now with the last two remaining tribes, and he is sort of this watchdog culturally, right? He's a watchman, and he's watching what's happening within this particular setting, right? He sees the last two tribes, this remnant of God's people, and he sees that God's people are not acting like God's people. He sees that they have fallen victim to the same things that the northern tribes had fallen victim to. They're worshiping idols. They become self-seeking and self-interested. They're litigious. They are becoming very kind of wealthy and powerful in their own thinking and mind. They almost think that they're too big to fail in some ways from their perspective. And the prophet sees all of this, and he's highly agitated at the fact that God's people don't seem to be honoring God, but God does not seem to be doing much about it. Right? So he's looking and saying, God, where are you? I mean, if these are your people, but your people are in sin and the culture's falling apart, and I'm watching the culture, man. I'm reading the blogs. I'm reading the journal articles. I'm checking out the news. I'm into pop culture, and I see the decay of the culture. God, why aren't you doing anything about this? And the God says, you know, it's funny you say that. I'm getting ready to do something about that. Right? And he goes, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Babylonians to the east who've been really threatening everybody. They're going to come in, and they're going to wipe out all of you in Judah. And so I'm taking the belt of the Babylonians into my hand, and I'm dragging you to the woodshed, and I'm going to spank you. That's how I'm going to solve this. And of course, Habakkuk hears this, and he's completely freaked out. He's like, what are you talking about, Willis? You can't use Babylon. I mean, we're bad, right? But they're wicked. They're evil. Like, do you really use evil to deal with bad? And so he has this big question. He says, come on, really, if you're holy and we're helpless and they're harsh, then how is this right? Right? This is where he ends. And so he's like asking these questions. He wants to know. And then in chapter 2, verse 1, he says, I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself at the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and then what I will answer concerning my complaint. So this is where we left off last week. He sees that God is going to deal with the Israelites by way of these Babylonian invaders. And he's got all these questions about it. And he wants to know how God is going to respond, all right? And this is a hard place for our little hero here because, again, he's taking his post on the tower, right? He's watching to see what's going on, but his problem ultimately is if he looks inside, he's waiting for an explosion, and if he looks outside, he's waiting for an invasion. So if your job is to sound the alarm of warning, what do you sound exactly at this point? right? Like he can tell his people, hey, the Babylonians are coming, but they're not going to listen. They're raising up a lot of other prophets and say, it's fine, we're good, we're solid, God's on our side, no big deal. So he's just sort of stuck, like, all right, God, what are you going to do? What are you going to answer? What's going to happen next? What siren do I sound? Now, what happens in the next verse, I think it's interesting. It says in verse 2, after he said all of this, it says, the Lord answered me. And the Lord said this, he says, write the vision that I'm about to give to you and make it plain on tablets so that he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, you need to wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Now, I want to highlight something here really quick. When God finally decides to answer Habakkuk, you have to brace yourself for the fact that he's not going to answer the questions that Habakkuk has. He's not going to one for one respond. All right, that's not what's going to happen. In fact, this is what God is so good at doing. We have all these particular questions. We have 1,000 questions about why this and why that, and I don't understand it. Help me understand. And then God will roll in and he says, I'm not going to answer any of that, but I'm going to reveal myself to you. I will remind you of my character. I will remind you of my person. I won't answer the particulars. I don't get into the particulars. I don't need to justify myself. I don't need to explain myself. I don't need to make sure that you get everything. But the one thing God wants to make sure that Habakkuk knows is who God is. That God is still just. That God is still good. That God is still in control. That God's providence, which is his power over all things, that God's providence is greater than Habakkuk's perspective, right? So he says, I'm going to give you an answer, but it's really not exactly the answer you're looking for. It's the answer you need, but it's not the answer you're looking for. So he says, in light of this, I want you to write this down. And I want you to notice there, it says, make it plain on tablets so that he who is running by may read it. Now, this is uncommon. All right, the Jews in this particular period of time did not take time out to be like, hey, you know what, let's chisel that into stone too. Right? They would put it on big rolls of, just like paper basically, that they roll up. So when God says, I want you to put it on stone, it means something critical. And here's what it means. What I'm going to tell you to write down needs to endure for a while because it's going to take a little while. Right? If you put it on paper, that's going to burn, that's going to come apart, that's not going to last. This is going to be an exercise in my love and grace to my people in a way that is painful, and you're going to need to write it on something that endures, so it is to be permanent. Next, he says it's public so that anybody can see it, and it's got to be pithy because if you're running, it's got to be a quick glance, man. So, public, permanent, pithy. He says, I want you to write it in that way because you know what I'm about to do is going to be corrective. What I'm going to do is going to solve the problem. Israel is grasping idols in their hands, right? The people of Judah, the last two tribes, they have a death grip on their idols, and God is going to pry that from their hands. But again, it's going to be a painful process, and so he's reminding him, you got to write this stuff down. You got to make sure that everybody sees this. Because in a few short years from the time that God is speaking to Habakkuk here, we're going to see the Babylonians invade. They do this in 598 BC, and it lasts for 70 years. 70 years. Let me put that in perspective. I want you to pick your president in your head right now that you have not liked. It doesn't matter which party, it doesn't matter what time or era. You pick the president, that president hurt our country more than anyone. They affected us negatively more than anyone. And you go, that was the worst 4 or 8 years of the Republic. Now take that times 9, and that's what these guys are facing. A long period of time, a lifetime. Right? When Habakkuk hears this, here is this painful truth. He's going to come, he's going to live, and he's going to die before he sees change. His culture that he is lamenting over will not see change in his lifetime. That's a hard truth to grasp. It's a hard reality to think that, I'm proclaiming this, I'm asking God to act, but God is not going to act in my timeline. I know Habakkuk, he's no different than me. Hey, God, look at our culture, it's falling apart. What do you say, 6 months? Maybe a year? Just some new leadership will fix everything? right? That's probably what he was thinking when he went into this, and now he's finding out, nope, it's going to be a long time, so long that it's going to be very easy to think, you know what, God's never going to fix this. It's never going to change. It's never going to turn. It's never going to be repaired, right? And so God says, no, you got to write this down because it's going to come. It's going to come. See, I think it's hard because life is like a vapor, and so we want everything now, right? We want everything now. And in light of that, it's hard for us to actually envision that sometimes the way forward is the way backward to go forward. We don't like that. Like, I don't know about you, but when I take road trips, if we are like 2 blocks from the house and Ellen says, oh, I forgot something at the house, we have to turn around. I don't like going back. We're going forward, man, right? And that's what God is telling Habakkuk. Here's the deal, man. It's going to take a while. We're going to have to go backward for a season. We're going to have to lose our homeland. We're going to have to lose a sense of cultural identity. We're going to have to lose our comfort. We're going to have to lose our freedom. But you know what? What I'm going to do in that? I'm going to bring back a restoration. And so we have to go back to go forward. And it's hard because, again, many people are going to live and die and never see it. And so, again, God has to remind, it's coming. It's coming. You have to trust the character of God in the context of what he is unfolding, right? And so he's trying to really just cement that in the mind of Habakkuk. So Habakkuk says, all right, I'm ready to write this down. What am I going to write down? And so in verse 4, God says, let me start off with what the issue is. I've talked about the Judeans and their sinful problems, but I acknowledge that while I'm using the Babylonians, this is what God would be saying to Habakkuk. I know while I'm using the Babylonians, they're bad people, and I want to address how bad they are now, right? Because, again, part of Habakkuk's problem is how can you use an evil group to deal with a sinful group? That just seems, that doesn't seem fair. God says, well, no, I know they're evil. In fact, he says in verse 4, behold, I can see that when I look at the Babylonians, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him. Probably in the simplest way to put it, the Babylonians, their source code is pride. Their entire culture is built on the framework of being proud. Everything about them is proud. They celebrate their pride. It is their big beacon on a hill. We're a proud people. They're proud of their strength, they're proud of their wealth, they're proud of their leader, they're proud of their military. They are proud to the core. And the problem with pride is that it informs the soul in such a way that it tells your soul you're elite, you're superior, you are better, and then that clouds everything else. It's a toxin that seeps in. And so when you're proud, you see other cultures different. You see your own cravings in a very different way. You have different levels of control or the lack thereof because pride starts to blind. Pride starts to consume. Right? Pride was the central sin, not only in the devil, but also in humanity. We thought we could figure out things that God already had solved, and we thought we were better than him, those kinds of things. And so when you have pride problems, you have conscience problems, you have clarity problems, you have civility problems, and you ultimately have comfort problems. All of that kind of rolls in. In fact, in 1 John chapter 2, it says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life is not from the Father, but it is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires. Right? So you have this New Testament warning that says, you know what? There is not an ounce of God in pride. It is all you, man. It is all your ingenuity. It is your sense of resolve. It's your criteria. It's your moral code. That's what's at work in the context of pride. And so pride is this weird beast. It's like a furnace, right? Where you go, I want the warmth of the furnace, but you have to keep feeding it to get the heat, right? So in other words, it's going to take more than it gives, and it becomes this accelerated problem where you're feeding pride more of what it wants so you can get what it gives, but pretty soon you realize it's controlling you. You're not controlling it. Pride is like this, almost a type of intrusive parasite that takes you over, right? In tandem with this, the other thing that pride does is it blinds. Not only does it take more than it gives, it blinds you to reality. And I'm going to speak just personally to that for just a second. I was reflecting just this last week on seasons in my life where now I refer back and I go, you know what? That was a season of pride for me. And it's weird because when I look back at my seasons of pride, there's embarrassment or a sense of guilt, or like if Matt now could go back to Matt then, Matt now would punch Matt then, right? Because Matt then was just a dweeb. But at the time, Matt then thought he was really smart. And he was perfectly clear. And he understood everything was going on. And the only real problem was everybody else was idiots. And if everybody just get on board with Matt the brilliant, it would all go great. But again, I can look back now and say, wow, that pride really blinded me to some things. And I really let the worst of me get ahead of things. Well, that is the poison of pride, and that's what's happening with the Babylonians. And so God says, I see what's going on. They're proud, right? Their soul is puffed up. He goes on to say, moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who's never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death, he has never enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects all of his own peoples. Now, you might read this and go, I don't even know what that's saying. Like, I don't even know how to read that. Well, here's what it's saying. The way like a Hebrew listener would hear it, what God is saying is they're drunk on their own power. They're so riddled with their own pride, they are drunk on their own power. It's not literally they're drinking wine, though that's probably true. They're probably having a great party as they conquer nations. They're high-fiving all around. They're having a great time winning, right? Like Charlie Sheen winning, right? So they're winning, and they're drunk with their own might. They're drunk with their own power. They're certain of themselves. They don't care. And because it's all laced with pride, they're not seeing anything clearly. You just drive forward in raw ambition, right? So God says, I see all of it, Habakkuk. I see their pride. I see their drunkenness with power. I see their cruelty. I see how they're just gathering nation after nation. You think this eludes me? I see that they're roughing up the world, but here is the truth and the promise. Pride is at its highest just before it falls, right? So they're at the height, right? They're marching. They're going. They're winning, right? It says here that they're gathering nations and they're collecting people. And in this, they're doing it mercilessly and unjustly and those kinds of things. But they don't realize that power is a very precarious thing. And sometimes you wield so much power, you don't realize that you're also unintentionally divvying out power to your enemies in the process. Maybe it's the power of revenge or retribution, a sense of resolve that says we're going to one day rise up and deal with our oppressors, right? But this is what Babylon is doing. While they're wiping out everybody, they're actually empowering them with revenge. They don't know that, so God begins to warn of that. God says basically to Babylon in this text in verse 6, shall not all of these people that you've taken over, shall they not take up their taunt against him with scoffing and ridicules? And toward him they will say, woe to him who, ... He says, don't you realize that all these people that you're wiping out one day are going to say, you know what, man, we're sick and tired of this. Enough's enough. We're stepping up to the plate. We're going to say, woe to you. Now, this word woe is an interesting word. I don't know exactly how you could say it. It might be like, whoa, right? Or whoa. Or whoa, 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 whoa. I don't know how you say it, but I know what it is. This word woe is a taunt. It's a taunt, right? It's a your mama joke is what it is, right? You're so babyish, mama put baby in your name. That's what it's like. They are going to be taunted by everybody. They're powerful, they're mighty, they're strong now, but God says taunts are coming to you. In fact, what we're going to see here are 5 taunts, 5 woes. And here's what I want to call these 5 woes. These 5 woes are how to implode a civilization in 5 simple steps. Right? So, these 5 things, if these are 5 things that are true of your culture, of your civilization, you will destroy your civilization. Guaranteed. These 5 steps are going to do it, right? And he's going to remind the Babylonians and remind us who read that, you know what? There is no such thing as a nation too big to fail. There is no such thing of a nation being so powerful and so wealthy that it is unstoppable. It doesn't exist, right? Ask the Egyptians or the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Persians or the Greeks or the Romans or the British. Ask the Nazis, ask the Soviets. You can ask whoever you want, right? Because what is true is all of these powers eventually fall or implode due to these 5 woes, right? And so God is saying that the oppressed will eventually come after their oppressors, right? So he says, when is it going to be when they finally just rise up and come after you? So what is the first of these? Well, it says there in the end of verse 6, they're going to say, woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. For how long can this go on? And load himself with pledges. Pledges are loans. And in Hebrew, it's the word bite. Right? So actually what he's saying is, how long can the Babylonians go around biting everybody by trying to oppress them with heavy burdens of loan? Right? So here's kind of your scene. Here's this dude chilling, and the Babylonians invade, and you have a home, and you have property, and you have animals. And the Babylonians roll in, and they say, hey, I like your home. Your house is now my house. Well, I guess it's the spoils of war. Okay, here's my house. And they go, no, but we're going to let you keep your house. In fact, we're going to sell your house back to you. All right, I guess you can sell me my house back to me. Cool, so they give you a loan so you can buy your house back. And they go, okay, but you just have to use, like your animals and stuff as collateral. Okay, I can do that. So you're buying your house back, but then pretty soon the ARM percentage goes up and everything else, and you're like, we got to take your animals as well. You go, well, I don't have enough money to take care of my animals and pay the loan for the house that was mine that you took from me and sold back to me. How do I do all of this? Well, you just have to become our slave. But you can be my slave working for your house and your animals that I took from you, and now you're trying to pay me back. It's like this big, twisted, crazy loan system. And this is what the Babylonians were doing. So again, everybody had their stuff, lost their stuff. Now they had to basically enslave themselves to try to, quote, earn their stuff back. And they would just do it time and again. And so all these people are just getting riddled with debt. Now, we don't have that problem today, but what we do have is these dudes that sit down, they say, you know what, I know you can't afford this loan right now. Right? I know you can't afford it, but you know what? You're going to get a raise like in 3 years, right? You're going to be making more money. So, we're going to do this thing. It's called an ARM. Don't ask us what it is. Don't sweat it. But we're going to do this thing called an ARM. And you can get into your house and everything else. Don't worry about interest rates. We're going to give you credit cards. You need money now. We're going to give you a credit card. 18%, that's nothing, right? So, there are things where within any culture where you start to look at your people and say, you know what? We can take advantage because we're interested in gain. Any culture that starts looking at its people and sort of just monetizing them for its own purposes and interests, that's a dangerous place to be. And so the first woe that destroys any culture is unprincipled gain. Unprincipled gain. Gain is fine, right? To earn is great, to save is great, to invest and have a return is great. There's no problem with gain. But pretty soon, when gain becomes unprincipled, when the desire for gain overrides the sensibilities toward fellow people, that's when you're in a precarious place. And that's exactly what the Babylonians are doing. They're just using people, right? Heaping loans on them, right? Putting the bite on everybody that they invade. But then God says in verse 7, will not your debtors suddenly arise and those awake who make you tremble? Then you will be spoil for them. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the peoples shall plunder you. For the blood of man and the violence to the earth, to the cities that cry out, to all who dwell within them. It just says those who you have bitten with your heavy loans will now turn and bite you. That's really what he's saying. They're not going to put up with these heavy loads any longer. They're going to come after you, Babylon, and you have to realize. And when they do, man, ugly begets ugly. Ugly begets ugly. I remember recently, I think I was watching a documentary, and they were showing the footage of when the soldiers captured Gaddafi in Libya. Right? They finally got a hold of the guy that had caused them pain for so long. It's horrible what they did to that guy. I mean, I'm not saying he's a good guy. But boy, ugly begets ugly, right? And so God says, ugly is going to beget ugly here. You need to watch out, right? That is the first woe the first woe that destroys any culture is unprincipled gain. The next one starts in verse 9. He says, woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. He says, woe to anybody who makes money through exploitive or sinful industry. Right? So think about like the Nazis, who would just take all the possessions of the Jews and decorate their houses, take Jewish homes and make them their own homes. Just didn't care, just took. It's mine. It's my house now. I'm using evil gain to get ahead. Or you think about the banker in recent years that says, you know what, yeah, I'm going to have my big penthouse and I'm going to be really comfortable. And yeah, I know all of these bonds are junk bonds. I know that all of these mortgages are going to fail. But you know what? I'm getting rich right now. I don't care. I'm just doing my thing, man. I'm getting ahead. You think about the pimp or the pornographer. You think about the just the person that likes to sell items, and they know they're not telling the truth when they sell it, whether it be a car or any other thing. They just kind of, I just want to make money, man. It doesn't matter if I'm honest about it. I just want to get ahead again. Maybe a slanted contract. All of these types of things. All of these things where we've made it to a point as a culture where a handshake is absolutely untrusted. And everything is having to posture because everybody believes everybody else is somehow going to be dishonest. When you get to that point, you have a problem. And the problem you have is the second woe that destroys any culture is basically social indifference. Social indifference. In other words, when people start to become indifferent about the people around them, as far as whether their actions negatively affect others, whether their actions are somehow dishonest, but it gets them ahead so they don't feel as bad, or it's just business, or whatever it is. When you start to have that in a culture, it begins to tip. Right? And this is what God is warning about. And so what's the result? It says, you have devised shame for your house, by cutting off many people, and you have fortified your life. But in this, the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the woodwork will respond. But he says, you know what, listen, you guys are getting ahead through all of this evil methodology. You've created an industry of social indifference. And now everything that you have surrounded yourself with will condemn you. Everything that you purchase, everything that you try to create your security with will say, you're a liar, you're a thief. You've just walked over the top of people to get ahead. You didn't care about others. You didn't care about the greater social good. It was all about you. He says that's going to come to ruin. God doesn't stop there. He says not only is it individuals who can do this, but sometimes it's whole communities. It says in verse 12, woe to him who builds a town with blood and founds a city on iniquity. Right? So when individuals do it, it's one thing. But when you have an entire community or entire cities building their entire infrastructure on sin and blood money, that's a problem altogether different, right? So in this case with the Babylonians, they were just enslaving people and building huge cities. They're like, we took you, you're our slaves, we're going to build some awesome hanging gardens, right? That was what was going on then. But I can't help but read this and go, I look at places like Las Vegas, right, where it's literally just predicated on the notion of, hey, what happens here stays here. Right? It's a city built on those things. Also LA or Miami, where there's a lot of people that go there trying to make it big or become famous or whatever else, and frankly, they're exploited. They're used. Right? Because, again, in the end, it's about the dollar. It's about, again, my own self-interest. Whether there's 100 people in my wake that are harmed in the process, it doesn't matter as long as I had my house on a hill and it was like a nest that was safe for me and I was all good, then it doesn't matter. That's the problem. In fact, the third woe, really at its core, that destroys any culture is when you devalue other humans. When you start to devalue them, right? When it's kind of impersonal. I mean, I even think about it like one of the things that I think you hear sometimes in the Northwest is Seattle is one of the primary entry spots for sex trafficking in the United States. And we hear that and go, that's horrible. What time's the game start? That's terrible. What's for dinner? Right? Like there's this, I mean, I'm not trying to say that makes us completely guilty, but there is almost a sense of, after a while, you just kind of, yeah, that's tragic. and then we move on with our lives. There's almost becoming this human indifference. I think even, I remember this last year where I thought, it's bizarre to me that in the press, I was reading more anger about Cecil the lion than about the selling of fetal parts. I'm like, and I had a couple of different people said to me, they said, frankly, I feel more sorry for animals than people. And I thought, what an interesting comment. These are family members, by the way. And I thought, what an interesting commentary on where things go after a while. When you again, as a culture begins to deteriorate where we even put our values. Human beings are lower than animals in some spaces and belief systems within our own culture. So it's a potent woe, right? What happens from this? Verse 13. Behold, is it not from the Lord of hosts that people labor merely for fire and the nations weary themselves for nothing? What he says is, when you build cities on evil and sin and human devaluing, it just goes up in smoke. It's going to burn. It's not going to last. That has a horrible foundation, and it has no place in the final kingdom of God. It will not last. Doesn't matter how much ingenuity you put behind it, it will not last. And so God says that is a serious woe to come upon the Babylonians. Now we go into verse 15. It says, woe to him who makes his neighbor drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk in order to gaze at their nakedness. I remember this like in high school where you had that one friend that wouldn't drink, right? So all the guys would be like, dude, we're going to take you out and get you wasted, man. Right? And be like, I'm not going to do it. And they finally take him out and get him wasted. And they're all like, he's so funny when he's wasted. Right? Look at him stumble. He's so funny. Take a picture. Right? Like that whole concept where it says, you know what, you're a good person, but we want to make you a bad person so we can, A, feel better about ourselves, and B, laugh at you. Right? That's the principle here. We don't want to feel bad about our iniquity, so we'll force you into our iniquity. That makes us feel better, and then we can laugh at you in the process. What's going on with the Babylonians is they come into these different places, and they go, here's what we're going to force down your gullet. It's not literally wine, but it is the intoxication of our vices. In other words, we're going to force you to embrace our newfangled morality and let go of your old morality. You need to embrace our new cultural values at the cost of your old silly values. Right? So the Babylonians would make people drink, basically, of their immorality. So, what is the fourth woe that comes upon a culture and destroys it? Moral decay. Moral decay. And I'm sure for us it's easy to probably look around and say, yeah, it just feels like there's some moral decay. It just feels like the only real sin within culture today is the sin of saying there's sin in culture today, right? Where there's a pressure that says you just need to embrace our values, the new values. The new values are the right values. The old values, the values that you hail from, the values that maybe even formed our civilization, those values are outdated. Those values are actually immoral because they're narrow. The new values, which are very wide, are the proper values. And if you don't embrace the wide, proper values, you may be facing some penalty. You may lose your business, or you may lose your job, or you may lose your reputation within society. If you don't conform, you just got to conform. If you drink the wine, you're fine. But if you don't, it's a problem. And so God says this is exactly what the Babylonians are doing, right? They are forcing people into their moral decay. But then he says this is what's going to result. You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. Drink yourself and show your uncircumcision, which is kind of a burn. Right? You make everybody drink and get naked, you're going to get drunk in a different way, and we're all going to look and say, you're ugly naked. That's what he's saying. He says, because you're going to drink the cup of the Lord's right hand, it will come around to you, and utter shame will come upon your glory. This is actually kind of a graphic scene where God says, you know what? We keep forcing people to drink your immorality with this heavy hand. I'm going to come in with my right hand, I'm going to make you drink, and you're going to get so drunk on your own debauchery, you're going to throw up on yourself, and you're going to have shame, your vomit is shame all over your supposed glory. I'll just give you your immorality. And that's what God does, right? In Romans chapter 1, he says, you know what? I'm just going to put you under my wrath by giving you what you want. I'm just going to give you what you want. You want sexual freedom? I'll give you sexual freedom. You want rampant greed? I'll give you rampant greed. You want people to be callous? I'll give you callous. You want freedoms galore? I'll give you freedoms galore till finally, bleh. And everything that you said, this is our glory. We've reached our apex. We are smarter than everybody else. It'll be barfed all over your front. He says that's what comes to a culture that falls into moral decay. And that's what's coming upon the Babylonians. In fact, in verse 17, he says, the violence done in Lebanon will overwhelm you, as will the destruction of the beast that terrified them, for the blood of man and the violence to the earth, to the cities, and all who dwell in them. In about 607, the Babylonians invaded Lebanon, and they decimated everything. Everything. I mean, it was an ecological disaster. It was a human disaster. I mean, they just said, we're just going to glass it. We don't care. Because at that point, they're unhinged from their morals. They don't have a sense of human value. They're more driven by their greed and their pride and their desire to build a city on iniquity. All these things kind of pile up. So God says, you know what? Enough's going to be enough at some point. It's going to come because you are guilty of all of these offenses, right? You're guilty of all of these offenses. Well, it doesn't stop there. He continues. He says there's more to come. There's kind of a final thing to come. He says in verse 18, what profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies. For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes a speechless idol. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, awake, to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath in it at all. The last final thing that God is looking at toward the Babylonians is not only are they riddled with pride and all these other things, but ultimately they're centered on idols, right? Idols. And idols are a huge problem because what idols are at their core is anything that you think, this is going to save me, this is going to secure me, this is going to satisfy me, and the absence of this is going to stress me and create fear in me and depression in me, and I will have no hope. Right? And so the Babylonians have just amassed all of these idols. We talked about one of the idols last week, a god with a big net over his shoulder with all kinds of people in it, and that's their victorious, proud God who beats everyone. And that's where they put their security. They said, this guy is going to do it. But now God is saying to Habakkuk, don't you think that's silly that people make something by their own hand and then step back and say, now lead me? He goes, I mean, that's silly, right? I mean, it's like, like making Gumby, All right, there's Gumby. Lead me, Gumby God, right? And expecting something, right? Nothing's going to come of this, right? This is why he says, man, they're silent. They have no breath in them, everything else. He's like, what are you thinking about? They do nothing. They just sit there. They're not animated. They don't have a voice to teach. They teach you lies just by existing, but they don't really teach you anything, right? So where do you think this is going? What's interesting about their culture, when they would worship an idol, what they would do is they'd set up a silent idol and then wait for it to communicate with them, which, again, cute. And if it wouldn't communicate, they would become more loud, right? They become more like, come on, talk. I mean, now it's just crazy, right? It's like remember when Elijah goes and he deals with the 450 prophets of Baal? Where they do their little shrine, and then they wait for their Baal god to do something, and nothing happens. So it says they all started crying out and yelling and cutting themselves. It's like, the louder we get, the more a stone will do something, right? Well, of course, nothing's going to happen. Doesn't matter how loud they get, because they've put their faith in a place of false security. And that is the fifth woe that befalls a culture and destroys it. The fifth woe that destroys a culture is false security, where you think my idol, my military, my money will protect me, because that's what they thought. That's what every culture that has fallen thought. They thought they had security, but it was false security, because they were trusting their idols more than the only God who can bring security. Now, with all of that said, I'm going to flash you forward by making you go backward in your Bible. Go figure. So, in Daniel chapter 5, I'm flashing you forward 59 years. right? So God has told Habakkuk, put this on a tablet, make sure it's public, make sure it's permanent, make sure it's pithy, because this is going to come. I'm telling you, it's going to come. Yeah, it's like 603, 602 BC. You guys are going to get hit by the Babylonians at about 598 BC. But then, on October 11th, literally we have the day. October 11th, 539 BC, right? Something goes down in Daniel chapter 5. It says, starting in verse 1, King Belshazzar, which is the son of Nebuchadnezzar, made a great feast for the thousands of his lords, and he drank wine in front of the thousands. Belshazzar, when he had tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the kings and his lords and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. And they brought the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem. And the kings and his lords and his wives and his concubines, they drank from them. And they drank wine, and they praised the gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone. This seems to be a parallel, right? So, remember all the things that God told Habakkuk? They drink, right? They get intoxicated. They force others into their sin and debauchery. They don't really care for anybody else's gods or anybody else's ideals or their morals or their virtues or their values. They try to force everything down everybody else's throat. This is a problem. But now, man, they're having a good time. Verse 5. Immediately the finger of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. And then the king's color changed, right? And his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way. His knees knocked together. And so the king called loudly to bring the enchanters and the Chaldeans and the astrologers. And the king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around their neck and shall be the third ruler in all the kingdom. Right? So he's having a party. He's totally misusing the worship instruments of God, getting wasted with all of his friends and family, and now there's this writing in his chamber. And he's like, okay, I don't know what that means. Nobody knows what it means. We've got to go find somebody to find out what it means. But nobody knows what it means. Right? Everybody's like, ask Willie, you know? So finally, somebody says, you know what, Daniel. Remember Daniel, he's that kid that was a Judean when 50 some odd years ago we invaded the Judeans and we took a host of their people and we took these young men and we trained them up in our ways, and that guy really was awesome for your dad. I bet that Jewish guy will know what's going on. So they go and retrieve Daniel, and Daniel comes over and he sort of scolds the king. He says, man, your dad was stupid like you once, right? And then God made him grovel around for a while and be like an animal, and then he finally realized, like, I'm stupid, I should be wise, and so then he tried to do it right, but you have not followed in those footsteps whatsoever. So in verse 22, he says, and you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all of this, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house you have brought in before you, and you and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drunk the wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold and bronze and iron and wood and stone, which do not see and do not know, but the God in whose hands you breathe, and whom are all of your ways, you have not honored. It says, and from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. He says, and this is the meaning. You've got 4 words. Many, tekel, parison. And this is the interpretation of the matter. Many, God has numbered your days for your kingdom and are brought to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And Paris, you have your kingdom divided, and it's given to the Medes and to the Persians. I'm sure this next part is hard. It says, then Belshazzar gave command, and Daniel was clothed with purple and a gold chain put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that says, he's now the third ruler of the kingdom. Right, this poor Jewish guy that was taken out of his homeland some 50 plus years before, and all he had is probably he ran out of town was what? Probably a stone that Habakkuk had chiseled. When you run, remember this little saying, it will come. Daniel, it'll come. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it'll come. Right now the day has come. And it says in verse 30, that very night Belshazzar, the Chaldean, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom. Right? So God says, it's going to come. Right? I know you don't think it's going to come, but it's going to come. One day, my promise will be fulfilled. And still, there's time after this where the Israelites need time to get back, right? It's not going to be just like, and that night, then Daniel's like, everybody go back now, quick, run. It's still going to take some time to finalize everything. But God keeps his promises. And so in light of all of this then, God gives 3 assurances back in chapter 2. If you were reading along, you probably saw moments where it's like, Matt, skip verses. Why did Matt skip verses? I skipped them because I wanted to come back to them at the end. And really quick, God gives 3 assurances. The first is in relationship to what he said about false idols, right? So he says, you know what, the Babylonians have all of these crazy things, and they yell at silent things. But God says, you know what? Verse 20. He says, I am in my holy temple. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. Yes, they build silent things and yell. You have a living God. And when you're silent before him, he speaks. And so the first assurance is the assurance of God's sovereign power. When you are in your Babylon, whatever your Babylon is, our Babylon is, whatever Babylon you inhabit, you have to say to yourself, even though things look bad, even though the wheels are off the wagon, God has sovereign power. He is still on his throne. He still reigns. He still rules. He is supreme. And more than complaining about the problem or fretting about the problem or worrying about the problem, God says, you would do great to be silent before me. Just listen to me, seek me, be still, and know that I am God. That's a great way to go about that, right? In fact, it's really the only sane way to go about that. I think about that story again of Elisha and the prophets of Baal, where after he sees this great victory, he's scared to death, and he runs out and hides in a cave in the mountains. And he's kind of like, God, where are you? I'm scared to death. And then there's a scene where he goes out of the cave, and there's this earthquake, and there's this fire, and there's all this noise, right? But then it says God wasn't in the earthquake, and God wasn't in the wind, and God wasn't in the fire. God was in the still, small voice. And I find sometimes that when things are falling apart, we don't slow down and stop long enough to really just be silent before God and listen. And so the first assurance is God says, you know what, I'm in control. Be silent and listen when you're struggling with these things. The second assurance is his future promise. The first is his sovereign power. The second is his future promise. Verse 14, just working our way back up the chain. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Right? You're looking at the Babylonians who have taken over the world. You could be looking at the Nazis who wanted to take over the world. You could be any time, any place where you're like, the bad guys have taken over the world. The bad guys will take over the world. And what God says is, you know what, one day, I will be taking over the world. I will permeate everything like water permeates. You will be immersed in the knowledge of my glory. And you have to trust that promise, right? You have to say, one day I will know as I am known. One day, all this greed, all of this pride, all of this hate, all of this arrogance, all of this idolatry will be gone. One day. Just like poor Habakkuk had to say, one day. Probably not even in my lifetime, but one day. It'll be different. So how do you live in light of one day? Verse 4. The righteous shall live by his faith. Right? That final assurance is his daily provision. You have to go, I know his sovereign power, I know his future promise, and therefore I live by his daily provision. This means faith toward God and trust in the faithfulness of God. You have to actually believe that, you know what? God cares for you. God is invested in you. God is looking out for you. God is developing something in you. God is going to do things in your life, oftentimes using the hardship, pain, and suffering of life to make you the best you he intends for you. Right? And so you just have to walk in faith. So when you have those questions of, but why do bad things happen? And why do I see this in my culture? And why does this group seem to be winning? And why do we seem to be losing our values? And why is greed so rampant? And the list goes on and on and on. And you just have to stop and say, God, I don't know the answer, but what I know is that you are good, you are just, you are loving. This is working out something in me, and I will trust you. That's the answer. Now, we may not like it. We may say, no, I don't want to do faith. I want to do that whole I take control thing. And you can, but it's exhausting. You can, but in some ways it ultimately leads to the same traps of the Babylonians. You just start making yourself your own idol, or your wherewithal, or whatever tools you can surround yourself with. Those become idols, and in the end it brings failure. So what we see is that God often doesn't explain himself, but he does reveal himself. And what we can do with that is either go, well, I don't like the answer. Or we can say, you know what, the answer is sufficient, and I trust the goodness of my God. Nahum 1:7 says, the Lord is good. He is a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows who will take refuge in him. So we just have to tell ourselves, hey man, when the day is bad, God is good, right? When life is unfair, I just have to remind myself, but you know what? In the unfair, God is still there, which I know just sounded very Joel Osteen. I didn't mean that. But when life is unfair, God is there. But that's true, right? It's true. And when all hope, when it seems lost, you have to say, wait, but the whole reason Jesus came into the world is so that I might be found. And if I'm found, there's hope. If I'm found, there's promise. If I'm found, there's a future. And therefore, what do I need to do? The righteous will live by faith. Let's pray together. Jesus, I pray that we would do that very thing. I pray that we would learn to live by faith. I know because I like reason and I like logic and I like philosophy, I sometimes struggle with faith to live by it because I want to solve. And I pray that you would submit me and my pride that wants to solve all the time. You would submit me to your promises, to your provision, to your providence. That I would put the focus more on you instead of the surroundings. I mean, we can look and say, here's the 5 things that destroy a culture. We could wonder if our culture is beginning to dabble in or dive into those very things, and yet it doesn't change what our response is, which is, okay, and the just will live by faith. We still live by faith. We look toward your future. We trust your providence. I pray that we would do that in your name. Amen.